Nahil, let's start, please.
أهلاً وسهلاً بحضراتكم. اسمي نهيل نصار من شركة Gender at Work. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nahil Nassar from Gender at Work. قبل البدء، إليكم طريقة اختيار الترجمة للغة الإنجليزية. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to guide you through the language accessibility of today's panel conversation, as it is possible to listen to this webinar in English. للاختيار للغة اضغط على زر Interpretation في يمين أسفل الصفحة. You will notice a button at the bottom right of the Zoom page titled Interpretation. Click it to choose your language. نود تنبيه بأن زوم لا يحتوي على اختيار الترجمة باللغة العربية. فإذا أردتم الاستماع للويبينار باللغة العربية، اضغط على الزر الألمانية. وإذا أردتم الاستماع للويبينار باللغة الإنجليزية، اضغط على الزر الإنجليزية. Please note the Zoom does not currently support Arabic as a language, and so if you wish to listen to this webinar in Arabic, please click on the button titled German. And if you wish to listen to it in English, please click on the English button. شكراً لكم. والآن نقدم لكم الشريك المؤسس في شركة Gender at Work, أرونا راو، لنبدأ الويبينار. شكراً. Thank you for your time, and I will now hand over to the co-founder of Gender at Work, Aruna Rao, who will begin our webinar. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to all of you. Welcome to this webinar on women at work in MENA, COVID-19 and beyond. Hope all of you are well and hope your families are well, and thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to say just a word about Gender at Work before we begin. For those of you who don't know Gender at Work, we are an international network of practitioners and scholars around the world who've been working for almost 20 years now on building cultures of equality in organizations, in groups, and now more recently we're working with social movements. What we try to do is study, understand, and try to find ways of changing deep structures of inequality and social norms that discriminate against many different kinds of groups, and particularly around gender, and to find innovative ways of addressing them. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Collective for Research and Training on Development Action, based in Beirut, Lebanon, as well as the Center for Inclusive Business and Leadership. I have the delightful job of introducing a dear friend and colleague, Lina Abu Habib, who is globally known, does not really need an introduction. But just to say a few words about this very well-known person. Lina is, as you know, as many of you know, she is a senior policy fellow at the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. She also serves as the chair for the Collective for Research and Training on Development Action. She is the strategic MENA advisor for the Global Fund for Women. And we are very happy to say that she is also a board member of Gender at Work. There are many, many more wonderful things I can say about Lina, but then we'll be spending the entire webinar talking about Lina's achievements, which are many. I am going to now turn over this webinar to Lina. Lina, please. Lina, you're muted.
Please ask. Yes, thank you. I apologize for this. Thank you very much. This is our first meeting for Gender at Work in the Arab region and is pertaining to the MENA issues. Actually, what we're going to speak about can be seen as new, but it's also related to the relationships of gender with this region. But now I think it's more necessary to speak about it because of COVID-19. We're going to speak about how work has gone to the private sphere, to the house, and what the repercussions are on women. So this is the issue that we will be discussing today. As gender at work, the colleagues have already done this discussion in Southern Asia with feminists and with civil society organizations there. And the idea was to have this discussion in this region to see how this pandemic has highlighted what women are suffering from, what are the variables, what are the challenges. I really appreciate that the three speakers are actually dear friends. I know some of them since the G conference, like my friend Nesreen Alami from Jordan, and the colleagues in CIBL Center for Inclusive Business and Leadership and the AUB, Dr. Fida, as well as the colleague that we all know, Mozen Hassan from Nazra for Feminist Studies. I'm really happy to have the three of you with us. Actually, this is not going to be as delivery of presentations or a lecture. It's more of a conversation. And then we will see also with the participants what questions they have or what opinions they have about this issue. Maybe the main issue in our region is the concept of work, how to define work as feminists. How did we reframe the concept of work? But also, what is the concept used in the public policies, especially public policies related to work and to the work of women, before speaking about work from home as a response to COVID-19? Maybe I can start with my friend Fida from the American University of Beirut, AUB. Fida, maybe you can start talking to us a little bit, not only about the concept of work or how you frame this concept of work, but in CIBL, in your center where you work, what is the conceptual framework for women's work? I will mute myself so that we can all listen to what Fida has to say. Thank you, Lina. Before speaking about the impact of COVID-19 on women's work, I want to speak a little bit about how women's work was before this pandemic. If we look at Lebanon and the most of the Arab countries, we see that women working in the formal sector, or the proportion of women working in the formal sector is not more than 24%. Most of them work in the informal economy. And in this informal sector, there is no protection for women. The work circumstances are very severe and the salaries are very low. If we look at the formal sector where we have 24% of women working, let's see a little bit how they're distributed, these 24%.
80% من هالنساء بيشتغلوا بقطاع الطبي كممرضات والعمل الاجتماعي والخدمات.
Social assistance and in the services sector. And of course, there is a difference in the wages and salaries. There is no parity in the way they're promoted and developed at work. So this was how things were before COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 impacted women's work more than it impacted men's work. So they're poorer, they're subjected to more violence. Why? Because the informal sector was more impacted by COVID-19 than the formal sector. And this is what I said, most of the women worked before COVID-19. And also in the formal sector, where we have a lot of women working in the services sector, we all know that the hotels and the restaurants are not working like before. So these women were either laid off or were given an unpaid leave, or their salaries and wages were reduced, as some companies are paying them only half of their salaries. And we have those who are working in medical care, social care, or as nurses. We see that they're subjected to a great risk because of COVID-19 since they're working with patients. This is in a very simplified way how COVID-19 is negatively impacting women at work. This is why, from a feminist point of view, if we want to see what work is, first, when we see the separation between work from home and working in sectors outside the house, I think that the separation is artificial, and this is increasing the patriarchal system because they say, or they want us to see that these persons need to be strong, they need leadership, and they show us that for those who work at house, they need to have feminine aspects, a feminine character, and they need to be loving and kind. So when we have this, you see that women are marginalized at work. What is the model that's being used here? The model is that men go to these works or to these jobs because they have the necessary masculine aspects. This is why I think we need to rethink work, and we need to rethink the factors, and we need also, again, to look at the care work at home that's not being paid. So I think we need to start paying for this work. It needs to be included in the paid work, and I think this will alleviate the way women are being looked at work. And if we see a woman who is strong, who has a leadership quality, they say, oh, she's like men, she's a tomboy, she's not really feminine. So I think we need to rethink all of these things together. Thank you. I would like now to switch to Nisreen. Nisreen Alami is also a very old friend of mine, maybe from Beijing days. And Nisreen has worked for a long time with the institutions. She worked with the United Nations and with other agencies and organizations. She has a wide experience in the Arab region and outside the Arab region. Nisreen, what is your opinion of the concept of work? And what do you think of the care work and how it can be mixed or how it was mixed with the paid work and what the repercussions were for women? Thank you, Nisreen. Please unmute. Thank you. Thank you, Lina. Maybe the beginning for me should be with a theory about the role of the governmental policies, especially the budgets and the government expenditure, because we need to look at the imbalances with regards to the burden of work for women, whether this work is paid or unpaid. I think this is only one axis. You have 24 hours per day as a person. You have 24 hours for every person. If I spend 15 hours working in an unpaid work, this means that the time or the hours that are allocated for me so that I can have a revenue are reduced, or these hours are reduced, or this time is reduced for me. So it is important to focus on the importance of switching from unpaid to paid care work, because if we want to see the economic rights of women implemented, then we need to face this dilemma, especially when it comes to taking care of the children, whether this is a pleasure or this is a responsibility. But people think that only women can do that, can take care of the children. But the main idea is that these responsibilities are being carried out by women, but men need to participate in that. The whole family, the whole household and society need to participate in that. And it's also a responsibility that the state needs to assume, because when women are working in the care work, this means that we need this work. The children need this work. Their health needs this work. They need this care work. So women are in reality delivering a value, an economic value that is supporting the family, but this is invisible and this is unpaid. So there were attempts along the years to see how we can make this kind of work, this kind of care work more visible, and how to show that that it has more than just this emotional or affectionate value, like this traditional value, but we need to show how it has an economic value that impacts health, human rights, etc. And it is also a social responsibility. And this shouldn't be limited to women. And this is not something that women should be requested to do, that only women should be requested to do. Because the more hours spent by women in this unpaid work, the more difficult it will be for women to participate in the revenue. So this is a responsibility for the society and for the government through the policies. So here we need, of course, the necessary services to be delivered by the government. When it comes to this care work that the society needs, we are speaking here about sports, about health, about daycare for children, about homes for the elderly. But as you know, in our region, our public budgets are not in that good situation so that they can deliver these services. But the public policies can play a great role in encouraging the development of such sector. First of all, because this is a vital sector that would help women enter the labor market, because also it has a very high revenue and the cost of investment is not that high. I think that the fiscal policies could also help in this regard. But what we know and what we see, and this is what happened in Jordan during the COVID-19 crisis and the lockdown. So women were not only asked to stay at home and to be herself the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Entertainment, but in addition to all of that, they were asked to do all the care work for free, and they needed also, the working women needed also to continue working from home. And as you know, also the daycare and the kindergartens were closed, so women were not able to send their children there. And then even when the institutions and the companies reopened in Jordan, the daycare and the kindergartens were the last to be opened. So these sectors were very vulnerable or are very vulnerable, and you see that the public policies look at them as if they were not that essential, although They are the pillar of our society, especially for working women. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nisreen. Before switching to Mazen, I would like to inform you of two things. Fida and the chat box, she repeated the figures and the percentages. And Ayushi from Gender Network asked a question for the attendees and participants. If someone would like to answer in the chat box. Mazen Hassan from Egypt. Mazen, now you can see also the poll. It's both in English and in Arabic for those who would like to answer. Mazen is a very well-known feminist and activist. She is very known to the extent that this has become a risk for her life. So here, I would like to say that we're all in solidarity with you, Mazen, and with everything that you're trying to do for a more just and fair society for women. Mazen, what does work mean for women? How did COVID-19 impact women specifically in Egypt, especially when the paid work switched to home? And how do you see the public policies in your country? Mazen? Thank you very much, Lina. Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy that I'm with you today. I'm happy, actually, for many uh, reasons. I'm happy to have a specialist with us. I feel like an activist today. I'm very happy that this is happening also in Arabic. Because in most of our region, we have Arab speaking people, at the exception of those maybe who are in Iran and Turkey. And this was a barrier before, I mean, the language. And I'm very happy to see participants that I know from the region. So I think this is now a space to link these movements together. I will speak in my quality as a feminist activist in Egypt. Now, how to define work from a feminist point of view? I think this is something very complicated, and I think this should be linked to the question of patriarchy. Do we look at work from the patriarchal point of view to which we were raised since we were children? I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, I was with a couple of friends, men friends. I asked them about work, how was work going? They said, yes, but do you have any problem, you? I said, this kind of work, the kind of work that I do is not always remunerated. So how are we as feminists to look at work? Now, of course, I don't like to generalize things, but when we work or when we make a lot of efforts at home, sometimes we don't consider this as work ourselves. And we look at these things from the standards that were transferred to us by the patriarchal society. This is why when we speak about work at home, people become confused. When we speak about the work of activists, people are confused. When we speak about working in the informal sector, also people get confused. So if we want to frame this a little bit, then first of all, we need to know that there will be a reaction about that, although this is a role that should be appreciated by society. I'm not only speaking about this being remunerated with money, but I think that this is an important framework to understand what women are being subjected to. Because when we speak also about the public policies, they say that they shouldn't work maybe because they don't need to work. These are the excuses that are being used. So sometimes when they're working in the public sector or the private sector, they say, well, she's working in this hospital or she's working in this ministry. And they don't know anything about the relationships within the household. And as feminists, this is something that we need to look into. What does our work mean? What is the difference between the public sphere and private sphere when it comes to work? And this is what should shape our view, our perspective, and our mechanism when it comes to work, whether in the private sphere or in the public sphere. And I think also here we have the issue of violence. This is related to this framing. And we see that women who work in the informal sector are not treated as women who really work. This is why they're subjected to a lot of pressure, to a lot of violence. Let's say they work, for example, in the insurance. You don't know where they are. You don't know what's happening to them. You see that their situation is becoming more and more difficult. And if you want to speak about something essential, you don't have anything to use here. Let's say we have a woman who is selling things in the street. If she's subjected to violence, what will happen to her? Do you think that she will remain silent because of the balance of powers, or do you think she will complain about it? I think that you have heard a lot about violence and women in Egypt and the whole society. So, do you think this will happen? Do you think that women will complain about this, about the violence, whether they were in the formal or the informal sector? Is this only the responsibility of the government, or is it the responsibility of the public policies as a whole, since this is impacting women? And it's also about the balance of powers, because the question of work is related to that of violence. So these are actually my preliminary ideas about this. Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Mozen. Before moving to the next batch of questions, why do you have these pictures behind you? Who are these people? These are women who are actually, these are activists. Isra was kidnapped on October 14, 1990. She was tortured. She is in prison, in Al-Qanatir prison. Hussam is an Egyptian politician. He is in prison since January 2019 because he was trying to create an alliance for the elections in Egypt back then. This is Sulafa Magdi. Sulafa is an Egyptian journalist. She was put in prison a couple of months after Isra. She's in a very bad situation in prison. And you know, since the beginning of COVID-19, people were in prisons, or the prisoners were not allowed to receive visits. They don't even receive letters, and even if they do, It's only in a few cases, and I can tell you that Sulafa is in a very bad situation because we don't know anything about her since 4 months. This is why we launched a campaign so that she could at least call her mom. So we want at least for them to be able to call their mothers just to show them that they're still alive. This is quite frightening for all of us and horrifying. Thank you, Mazen. Maybe I will use this as a bridge for the next batch of questions. But Mazen, I will stay with you for now if you don't mind. What happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is that women and older people had to stay home. And the public sphere, especially in countries like in Lebanon and other countries where they had revolutions and women were the pillars of such revolutions, had to go back home. And we have seen the oppression increasing during the pandemic. So before moving again to Nasreen and Fida, talk to us a little bit about this impact that Corona is having, that the COVID-19 is having, meaning that the public sphere is being monopolized now by the authorities instead of responding to the pandemic. So I'd like to start with you, Mazen. Someone is asking me now, do you think you will be safe after you talked about this here now? I say that God will protect me. I think that the situation in Egypt is like the situation in the region, but maybe in Egypt, as Egypt, we are overrated. Maybe some countries focus more on us. Maybe because I'm inside Egypt, I think that the situation is very severe. I don't know. And this is why I work on a different definition of the public and private sphere. I see that the public sphere was being more and more closed before people, especially before women. And women were trying to snatch their public spaces and their public sphere. And to do so, they have to pay a very high price. You all know what happened during the revolution, of course. I participated in January Revolution in different aspects. So we had to pay a high price for that. Many women were raped in a systematic way. Maybe the numbers were reduced back then, but I think that the spaces are being reduced, the public spaces are being reduced, especially in front of women. And this means that women have more reduced spaces to move, and they're subjected to more violence and are being framed in a specific way. We heard a lot about the rapes that have and attacks as well as assaults that happened in Egypt, especially with the two students from the American University of Cairo, and there were a lot of people saying, oh, the state now is doing something about it because these girls are from the American University. And this made me feel very sad because people were still looking at women that they came from different classes, and they looked at these girls, well, they had more rights, maybe because they were in the American University, and this is something horrifying. people look at these girls at the AUC, look at them as if they were more protected because they were going to that campus. And we have also now the new cities, and this is another question about the difference between the public and the private sphere. And the government is arresting a lot of TikTokers, a lot of girls who are TikTokers, saying that this is against the values of family. It's as if this was another public sphere that is now also governed by the state. So anyone now can complain about a girl because she posted a video of TikTok. So now we see this oppression and this repression against these organizations, against these women. So, for example, I'm accused of pushing women to irresponsible liberation or emancipation. So we tell women, you have the space, but some look at women as women who are respectful and others who are not, those who deserve protection and others that
أبوي في النظرة للحاجات إن ده هبة، ده مش حق. فإحنا بنراعي الستات كويس، فبنراعي الستات اللي بتشتغل عندنا في البيت عشان إحنا طيبات أو إحنا كويسات. إحنا
that
بنراعي
women that work at home, we respect women that work with us in the institution, not because this is right, because they think that they deserve it because they do this kind of work. So how can we change if this is still the spirit of our society? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Muzan, for this explanation that you gave. Nisreen, can you please talk to us a little bit about the public and private sphere and the impact of the lockdown or the impact of closing the public sphere after women have made a lot of efforts to go into the public sphere? It's difficult somehow to speak after we have heard Muzan, but it's also very sad what she said. But yes, unfortunately, there are a lot of women in the Arab region that are being oppressed and tortured only because they're demanding the basic human rights. COVID-19 hit the Arab region at a time where we had wars in Yemen, in Syria, and Palestine against the occupation. So we see this happening in Yemen while they tell us that we need to have a lockdown and to wash the hands so that when you die under the bombs and the shells, you will not die because of COVID-19. So it was really surreal. So we want to preserve the right for life, and we're afraid of the pandemic while the killing is happening because of the Israelis and Palestine, sometimes because of Arabs against other Arabs, and sometimes because of some people who are from the same nation. Lebanon was also going, or still is still going through an economic and political crisis. We see also what's happening in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia. And a while ago, since a while ago, the Arab governments are in a very vulnerable situation when it comes to their legitimacy and their economic capacities. We were always living under dictatorships, but dictatorships who were able to deliver the basic services like healthcare, education, and you always had job opportunities because the Gulf countries were recruiting a lot of Arab workers, and then they were able to send money to their families at home. But maybe since a decade and a half or since 2 decades, this started changing. The governments were not able to deliver anymore the basic services. The public sector is in a very bad situation. We see corruption everywhere in the political structure and the economic structure. And we see a role for the conservative movement that is increasing. And we see that the governments try to be liked by these conservatives by oppressing women. And here they mention the irresponsible liberation or emancipation of women. What is that expression? This is really sad. This is really complicated. And then COVID-19 came, and in Jordan, I can tell you that the response was a military response against COVID-19. They wanted to control COVID-19 through spreading the army in the streets so that they would protect people, of course, in a very patriarchal way. So you wouldn't see any women in the meetings, governmental meetings. You wouldn't see women in interviews on TV. How about women? Where are these women? They needed to speak, in my opinion, about how things were distributed, especially that before that we had seen women taking the streets in Lebanon during the revolution. And maybe this showed us that the women had an opportunity to be in the public sphere. COVID-19, work from home, and the lockdown was an opportunity to bring women back to the private sphere, to lock them in and throw the keys. So yes, of course, everyone was repressed because of COVID-19, but in Jordan, on one day, on the first Friday when they allowed people to move, specifically to go and pray, this was allowed only for men. So it was really confusing for many women's rights defenders. So even during the prayers at the mosque, they didn't want women. So until now, the main question in our Arab societies is the following. Where is the decent place for women? What is the decent place for women? Are women allowed to be in the public sphere, whether that is work, politics, a social movement, a political movement, working in syndicates? So what COVID-19 really showed us is the lack of social protection, of syndicate work, the lack of women's voices, even when it came to agricultural rights, to work at home, etc. So saying that the normal place or the natural place for women was home, especially during these dire economic times, in an unprecedented way, actually, in the Arab region, it was really confusing. But they wanted women to stay at home, even working women, under the motto of flexible work. They want women to stay at home, to work from home. And it's not just about this having this class issue. It's that this is beneficial only for maybe a very low percentage of women who work at companies, who have internet at home, who have a good connection. These are the women who can really continue working from home, but 90 or even 99% of women do not have this luxury, even for those women who are working from home. This does not give them the necessary protection because with the increase of unemployment, women who don't go now to their offices anymore and who are not visible in this public sphere anymore, these women will be the first to lose their jobs and to lose their place in the public sphere. So I have a lot of doubts when it comes to this flexible work agenda, although it could have been a gain for women, especially in how to balance the care work with their work. But this is leading to a lot of marginalization, especially with the high rates of unemployment among women. And the flexible work and the work from home are actually presenting a lot of risk for women. And maybe this is the end of the 25% that we thought were the working women in the Arab region. Let me go back to the point related to tightening things on women in politics and voicing their needs and demands. Because the governmental response was that oppressive, in Jordan, we have the defense law actually that puts on hold all the laws and freedoms, and it gives the government unprecedented authorities, and they used this to target people who were criticizing the political and the economic policies, and there is a total lack of transparency, and there are no opportunities to hold the government accountable or activate the, the people's or grassroots institutions. Thank you, Nisreen. I would like now to go back to Fida. She said something very important. I mean, Nisreen. Will we see this 25% decreasing even more? And there was a point that was mentioned in another meeting. Don't forget the polls, please. Now it's closed again. Fida. In one of the Arab feminist meetings, some activists, some feminist activists said that they helped a lot of reserves when it came to working from home because it meant losing having women in the public sphere. So what do you think about that? Was that a loss? Thank you, Lena. This problem does not exist in all countries because the main issue is separating between the private and the public, and the stereotype that women take care of the children and the elderly, and men are to provide for the family and work in the public sphere. There is a new study conducted by UN Women. They found that in the Arab region, 2/3 to 3/4 of men think that women's place is at home, taking care of the children. The data showed that women were doing 3 times more than men when it came to taking care of the children, cleaning the house, and doing the chores. And on the question of who does the chores more than once per week, men said that they were doing one thing only per week when it came to the house chores. So there is no real participation from men in this care work. If there was a real participation, there wouldn't be a problem. But I think working from home now will push us to rethink the public and the private sphere. Men before were leaving the house and didn't know what women were doing during this time at home. Maybe now, while they're at home, we are seeing how much work women have at home. But if we always think in the stereotyped way that men work and women do the care work, then this will, of course, lead to a lot of problems. Women will have a lot of psychological issues. They will be subjected to a lot of domestic violence. The statistics showed that the domestic violence increased by three folds. A lot of women in the Arab region are being subjected to domestic violence, and with the lockdown, and while it became more difficult to go out of the house, women are trapped and are victims to this violence and cannot defend themselves. Allow me to speak a little bit about CIBL, Center for Inclusive Business and Leadership. We founded the center in 2019 with my colleague Charlotte Karam. It's been 2 years that we've been working on promoting inclusive workplaces and decent work for women in the Middle East. You asked about democracy and you asked about the impact of this tightening on women and narrowing down on women. In our center, we rely on partnership. If you look at the democratic societies, even now with the pandemic and how they responded to it, you see that in the democratic societies, there are a lot of partnerships with the civil society, with the non-governmental organizations who are working on social solidarity. But under dictatorships, you have seen the kind of decisions that were made. But you see in the democratic societies a kind of trust and cooperation between the people, the grassroots, and the government. So in the CIBL, the AUB, the American University of Beirut, we believe in this partnership with the civil society, and we have a number of partners like the employers, the governmental and non-governmental organizations, the universities, and the other institutes, so that we can have a decent work and inclusive workplaces for women in the Arab world. Because there are a lot of standards and indicators related to gender, but these are related to the government. We want to work at the level of the institutions and the companies so that the companies where women work can provide the conducive environment for women so that they can really develop, they can be promoted with no differences in the wages and salaries. And I can tell you that partnership is very important with the civil society and the non-governmental organizations. For all people who would like to cooperate with us, we are open for that. I think this is the only way to change the stereotypes about women, and especially women at work in the Arab region. Thank you very much, Fida. Maybe we will run a little bit late because the discussion is really valuable, but I would like to answer a couple of questions before. Allow me first to change some of the questions that we had prepared, because a couple of participants talked about something essential, that is work and migrant workers, migrant domestic workers. this is very important if we look at what happened and is still happening in Lebanon because of COVID-19 and also because of the economic catastrophe and disaster in Lebanon. Many migrant domestic workers found themselves thrown on the streets with nothing. So here we have the issue of the migrant workers, and we have once again the care work that is allocated to women who are maybe less privileged than the citizens themselves. So what are the repercussions of the situation? And here I can see Elizabeth Villa-Gomez, who is also talking about internal migration, especially between two countries like Egypt and Morocco. So maybe now I can move back to Mozen. What about the migrant workers, whether those who are incoming or about internal migration? Mozen, can we highlight this, please, this issue with the pandemic, the public policies, and what's your perception in this regard?
الموضوع ده في مصر هو جزء من برضو علاقات القوة.
I can see that this is related to the balance of powers in Egypt. So what we do is that for this work that we consider should be a women's work, this is something that we are giving to women who are less privileged, So what we see is heterosexual men who have money who do that. And I think this is also related to the issue of the public and private spheres. So when even the street is closed and even when the street is locked in front of us, this will of course lead to systematic violence. So I have women who help, or we know that there are women who help at home. These are usually Christian women who are less privileged, and they are also under pressure because of their brothers. So this is an example because women deal or people deal with these women with inferiority. And this is something problematic again because it's like we're granting these women the money that they have. It's not that it's their right, but sometimes these people do not have a place to go to because their family, especially the males in their family, take all their capacities from them. And this is something essential in this perspective. So what can the government do? How can we have frameworks for this kind of work, whether it's paid or unpaid? And it's not only about money. We need to see how this can be framed in a different way. And I mean by that the care work, because at the end of the day, the money of the domestic workers does not stay with them. So even when violence is exercised by men against these women, the women who are in charge in the house would not speak out because they think it is something normal that the man in the house would treat the domestic workers like this because they're women. So through a feminist perspective, we need to understand how to create policies related to that. Thank you. Nisreen, allow me to ask you to give some comments about the issue of migrant workers. I agree with what Mazen said, but in my opinion, this is part of the whole system that looks with inferiority at the care work. I think it's inferior because we do not give any value to the cleaning work, and I'm doing it at home for myself and for my children. When someone asks me if I work, I say no. In the same way, when I bring a woman to help me clean at home, she has no rights at all. So it's a whole system, and this applies for those who work in childcare, those who work in daycare for children, in nurseries. And what was really sad during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, even when households were using workers to help them with the cleaning, if these were migrants or refugees or the most unprivileged, I can tell you that what happened with the lockdown is that they lost their revenue. And this was the first, these were the first expenses that the household let go of, because also those who were working in the family lost the revenues or the revenues were reduced. So they didn't bring these cleaning women anymore because the family didn't want to pay for them or even give them food to eat. In the same time, the airports are closed, and these domestic workers and migrant workers couldn't go back to their home countries. Unfortunately, I don't have information about interventions that happened to protect these women, although there were maybe some attempts by some governmental authorities. And what happened was that private individuals helped these workers. It was as if they were doing some charitable work. What is important for me is for us as feminists, when we speak about successful women, about successful role models at the international level, at the Arab level, on Facebook, when women are considered as pioneers, these women were able to succeed because a whole system was there to support them. They were also supported by those who had them at home, like the domestic workers. And this is only a small proportion of our society that is capable of recruiting a woman to do or to carry out all the care work or all the chores in the house. And sometimes, unfortunately, these women are treating badly or are mistreating the domestic workers who are also women. So, as I said before, these migrant workers are facing a precarious situation. And maybe in the Gulf region, we have this proportion of households using domestic workers. Until now, we failed in ensuring a protective system for them, because even so sometimes we forget to look at these women and consider them as groups that should be protected and whose rights should also be protected. If you allow, I will continue with the questions that we're receiving, because after a while we will close the webinar. Fida, please say anything that you have to say, but I also have a question for you. One of the participants is asking if there were any references, especially in our Arab region. So if there were any references related to the workforce migration, namely domestic workers. And is the experience of the domestic workers more difficult because of the migration laws that they're subjected to, like in Lebanon with the sponsorship law or other? Thank you. Thank you, Lena. I can share with you some links regarding this information and this data. But I have a question. Why do we have the highest percentage of domestic workers in the Arab region compared to Europe, compared to the United States? It's really rare to find households where they have domestic workers. So here, let us look into the policies of the government. What protection systems does our state or our government has? If women need sometimes someone to help them at home, it's because of the patriarchal system where the men do not help at home, and because the government didn't take into consideration giving women a long maternity leave or providing the necessary nurseries or daycare. So it is very important to see the connection between the government and the institutions or the individuals. So I really hope that something will happen at the level of the Arab countries where they would have political and socio-economic policies that protect women and ensure their inclusion at work. So I cannot say that women can participate in the public sphere and in the same time do not have the necessary maternity leave for them, and we don't have the nurseries and daycare for the children. I would like to speak about something else. It is the cross-cutting issues between the different minorities. So women are marginalized. Women from a place far from a location that is far from the capital are marginalized. The women who are from specific ethnicity are marginalized. So all these minority characters lead to more marginalization for women. So when it comes to migrant workers, they're women, they're from a different race, they're from a different country. So this leads to more marginalization. And what are the policies of our government against marginalization? Actually, we see less protection for them and more marginalization. This is something we need to work on. And in CIBL, as I said before, maybe I'm repeating myself, but it's very important to insist on the necessity of cooperation between the private sector, the governments, and the civil society in order to alleviate such marginalization and have more inclusion of women, all forms of women, Lebanese, migrants, foreigners, etc. Thank you very much, Fida. Fida, I would like to stay with you because I have a connected question. As it was said, we have a participant here saying that a lot of domestic workers lost their jobs in the Arab region. I know that the answer is evident here, but allow me to ask you the question. Are there any proposals to support or protect them? Do you think there are any proposals to support them? I thought the participant meant the governments, but maybe she meant the feminist movements. So maybe here you can give us the example of Lebanon. We are speaking about the migrant workers working in Lebanon or the Lebanese women working abroad? No, the migrant workers working in Lebanon. Let's take this example, migrant workers working in Lebanon.
كمان بنرجع بنشوف المهاجرات اللي بيشتغلوا بلبنان
For the migrant workers in Lebanon, where do they work? We need to look into that because there is no one experience. We need to look at their nationality, at their race, because unfortunately in the Arab society, we look at their nationality in a vertical way. So if we have someone that is not Lebanese, but is blonde and coming from the West, that we see that this person is superior to us. But for those who are coming from the South, who have a darker skin, then we consider that we are superior to them. So it depends on whom we are speaking of here because we have different ways to deal with them depending on where they came from. And it depends on the kind of work that they do. If they're working in the informal sector, then this is, of course, an unprotected sector. There are no laws, no protective laws. The work circumstances are very hard. And but if they're working in the formal sector in a company, then they're of course protected by the labor law. So for the persons who enjoy less protection and those who are exploited and subjected to violence, those are the people coming from the South because we look at them as being inferior. So we consider that these people are not protected. Now, who can protect them? Unfortunately, our laws, our regulations do not provide them with the necessary protection. These people cannot reach the right health care and nutrition that they need. Unfortunately, also in our societies, the only institutions that try to help them are the NGOs that have maybe donations or grants from other countries, or they have some projects that help them protect these people and provide them sometimes with shelters, waiting for them to go back to their country. We need to help each other, and the country needs to have new laws. There was a proposal for a labor law for the domestic workers, and more than 60% of women in the Arab region work in the informal economy, and there is no protection for this sector. There are no decent conditions in this kind of work. This is why the different partners need to work together in the country in order to regulate this kind of work and provide the necessary protection for those who are marginalized. Thank you. Thank you, Fida. Muzan and Nisreen, can I ask you to say some final words, and can we be forward-looking as feminists? What should we do in this regard in order to address this issue and the public policies in this regard? The statistics, the preliminary statistics with regard to COVID-19 and its impact in the Arab region, I think these statistics were conducted by the ESPWA. They showed that 1,700,000 jobs would be lost because of the lockdown in the past 3 months. 40% of these jobs were for women. Already, women had 25% only of the labor market, and now 40% will lose their jobs among the 1,700,000 jobs. I think that the COVID-19 crisis showed the importance of why the care work of women needed to be recognized and why it was very important to invest in introducing women to the labor market and about the importance of having the rights of women protected and respected when it came also to insurance and protection. And here we need to work all together, not individually, to this end. There were actually a lot of attempts in this regard, but I feel that in the Arab world, we still have a very long journey as feminists and as women who believe in the justice of our cause. But what's happening is that we are working individually. We don't always accept differences. We do not always respect our differences. And this is affecting, this negatively affecting our cause and the wider context in which we are working and we are working or demanding women's rights to be protected and implemented when we're asking for the participation of women in politics. So what I hope for is to be able to work all together. I'm very happy that we had this meeting today. We always maybe hear about each other, but now to see each other, it's also very important. And we need to continue this to see what the common mechanisms can be, because we already have common challenges that maybe have different forms. Thank you. Thank you, Nisreen. I think you answered one of the questions about the way forward before Mazen. Fida and Elizabeth inserted a number of references and reports that are quite useful in the chat box. Mazen? No. Lina, before switching to Mazen, allow me to say something. It is very necessary for us in the Arab world to work on facing our challenges and the way we want and not in a ready-made way. I think that sometimes the language that we use is not a language that we used ourselves, or I think that the perspective that we're using is not our perspective. And the flexible work is an example about that, because in the context of the Arab world, we don't have, or the concept of flexible work is different than the concept of flexible work in Europe or in the West. And there is a very important question that was asked. If we go back to the issue of work and the definition of work, what about the sex workers? And a lot of feminist movements in the region try to identify all the problems that sex workers were facing because of the pandemic. So, in your opinion, is it possible to think all together about the frameworks maybe that should be created in order to face these challenges that the sex workers are suffering from in our region? Thank you, Lina. I think this is related to the issue of violence. And sex workers are the obvious example if you were to try and answer your question. But first, when it comes to work and violence, as a feminist, we need to always work on that. We have spaces as feminists to speak out, to think, and sometimes not to be put in prison. I think this is the space of freedom that would help us really work and be productive in our work. Of course, I'm proud to be an an Egyptian feminist. I know that this movement has done a lot, has achieved a lot, and I'm really happy that this is happening in Arabic. This meeting is happening in Arabic because we are speaking to each other, we are understanding each other in our language. And then maybe the younger generation will see that we're a real feminist movement. So as long as we deal with women as women who are polite and women who are impolite, women who are respectful and women who are not respectful. So violence will continue, and what you asked about the sex workers will continue, and we will have no real development or progress in that. And I think that the sex work here is really an essential question. Let's say you are working in this region, and as Fida said, you can be working maybe if you have a masculine character, if you don't show that you're feminine, if you know how to shout out loud, and if you are raised in a way that you don't put on skirts and dresses, and if you say, oh, feminists, what are these feminists that put lipstick, etc. So once we can overcome the stereotyping, then we can really start working, putting an end to violence. But since people continue to think this way, then they will continue to think also the same way about violence. Because this framework from the beginning is related to morality. I told you that TikTokers, women TikTokers were put in prison in Egypt. Why? In my opinion, it's because they express a new generation. They express a new trend. So I can tell you that a 15-year-old girl introduced me to TikTok, and they have other tools to express themselves. TikTok is one of them. So we dealt with sex work as being a work, and any work that causes women to be subjected to violence, then in the sex work, this means that the body is the framework that is leading to women being subjected to violence. But this is a question that you also have within our movement. It's an important question, and it's not a question that is limited to ourselves. So even if there were women who really believed in the rights of these women, the sex workers, maybe they wouldn't want to speak about it publicly. Why? Maybe because they don't really see it as work. But it's also a question of choice, because work is a matter of choice. And this is a space for women to choose. Feminism is there, in my opinion, so that women can have a choice, whatever this choice is. And I think we need to accept the choices of different women, especially as feminists. They are free to do what they want, but this is part of the process of the activism that we do, of the feminism that we believe in. We need to be able to speak about sex workers without having this tension. Oh, this is immoral. Oh, they're impolite. Oh, this is funded by the foreigners, etc. So as long as this is something discussed in a gendered way, then things will continue as they are. I can tell you that the Muslim Brotherhood, when they put the constitution, they put in the same article the trafficking in human beings and sex work. And when the constitution was amended, this stayed as it was. So once again, this is related to the balance of powers. But we need to send different messages to women. We need to tell them that we understand their experiences, we understand their choices. As feminists, we need to talk to women. But where is the voice of these women, wherever they came from, whatever their race is? Thank you a lot. It was really a perfect closing, but before giving the floor to Aruna to close the session, I would like to ask our colleague, the interpreter, to show her face a little bit so that everyone can see her. Elsa, can you put please the video on so that you can see me? Yes, hello. Can we please all together thank the interpreter? Thank you, everyone. I know that it wasn't something easy, Lina is saying, and I would like to thank the colleagues from CIBL, CRTDA, and Gender at Work who were with us, and all the panelists, really, the three of you. You were excellent. It was a great talk. Aruna, the floor is yours. Aruna, can you speak in Arabic, please?
Yes, thank you. I will get on those classes right away. Thank you so much. Forgive me for not speaking in Arabic. But I really want to thank you all for a really insightful, informative, and very interactive session. The issues you covered are huge. You know, and I think you've connected them and woven them together in really interesting ways that have generated so many questions. And thank you to all of you for responding to the questions as they've been coming up. I was really struck by the insights as you started out talking about work and how it reinforces gender stereotypes, how there are different kinds of workers, how this is impacting the MENA region, how COVID is highlighting and really deepening some of these fissures, the need for reframing, and how, and you've all talked about how that needs to be, this public-private divide needs to be reframed, how the value placed on these issues, on women's work in the home, needs to be revalued. It was really, really insightful, and thank you for FIDA. You had so many resources that you shared. And I think, and you so gratefully also gave people your email so that they can come back to you for more resources. But thank you all so much, Mohsen. It's really inspiring to hear you talk about your own activism and the kind of risks that activists like you, feminist activists like you, are facing in Egypt, and how you're continuing to maintain your solidarity. Nasreen, you are a dear colleague of Gender at Work. It's always inspiring to listen to you talk. You are always insightful, and I'm so grateful for that. Lina, you are, again, what a fantastic job moderating this very complex set of issues, as only you could. We're so grateful to you, Lina. There are thanks that go around there, as you've so kindly thanked Elsa. I also want to thank Elsa for doing a great job in in translating. Nahil, who was on in the beginning and who has turned her video off. Thank you so much, Nahil, for your organizing and your rapporteur work. Big, huge thanks to Ayushi, who is the Gender at Work communications manager. Although she stayed kind of in the background, Sudarshana Kundu, who is online, who is the Gender at Work co-director. I know Sudarshana is so eager to speak more with you, and we all at Gender at Work are more interested in seeing how we can work together on some of these issues that we really care about. So I want to just thank you all, and thank you so much to the participants for your interest and for your really great questions and for engaging our speakers so much. So this, as Ayushi said right in the beginning, this will be, this is recorded, so you'll have access to this. And we really look forward to your engagement, your continued engagement, and your activism. So thank you to all of you. Thank you very much.
Aruna, may I just say two things? Can I just also
Sure.
thank the colleagues from CRTDA, Hoda, Lina, and Aziza, and may I make a promise on behalf of Gender at Work that we would do more on MENA region?
Absolutely, that would be so fantastic.
Goodbye.
Yes, we're absolutely looking forward to working more in MENA. You know.
Perfect.
Thank
Well,
you.
nice meeting you all.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.